the failure to unite that happened earlier this week. But before we get to that, let's talk about some global politics and really a failure by the administration right now, because they're riding the fence. And so what we've got going on right now is, Benjamin Netanyahu, lovingly known as Bibi, the leader in Israel, the elected leader in Israel. What has been expressed by the president and the administration is that, they believe in Israel and Israel's right to defend themselves. However, they do not support Netanyahu and the way that he is governing and his efforts in the occupied territories, in Gaza and so on and so forth. And oh, by the way, they're also, as we talked about last week and even earlier in the show, we talked about, us dropping aid into Gaza to help the Palestinian people, which, we all know how that ended up. I mean, it actually was even worse than when we recorded last week, because I don't know if you saw it. There was a failed drop where there was a parachute failed on one of the pallets and it landed and it killed 5 people.
I did see that. I did. Yeah. Yes.
It was even worse than we imagined. And we talked about last week on Tuesday, if that's even possible, but that did happen. So really what you've got is Netanyahu coming back and saying, listen, I'm the elected leader of Israel. The people here in Israel like the way that I'm doing things. They support the way that I'm doing things. And really, United States, I expect more out of you. I expect better out of you as an ally. I don't expect you to play both sides. And really, when it boils down to it, if you don't like it, just keep your nose out of it. And he's become combative with President Biden.
Sure.
Which, not that long ago in the previous administration, we had made great strides in peace in the Middle East. And now look where we are. Not only do we have a war going on, in Israel against the Hamas and their folks, but we also now we're also burning a bridge with our greatest ally in the region with Israel, because we've got, an administration and specifically a president who can't articulate what we're trying to do because we're afraid to take a side. It's really what it boils down to.
He's getting called out. He's getting called out for trying to play both sides of it, to try to stay, appease everyone. And I'll read this is the direct quote right here. It says, it's either Israel or Hamas. There's no middle way. We have to have that victory. We can't have 3/4 of a victory. We can't have 2/3 of a victory, because Hamas will reconstitute itself with these 4 battalions in Rafah. Did I pronounce that correct? Rafah?
Rafah, yeah.
Rafah, okay. Reconquer the Gaza Strip and do the October 7th massacre over and over again. And that is his response to Joe Biden's statements that military operation in Rafah is a red line. So yes, he is making his position very clear on this, that it's one or the other, not both. And now Biden, of course, will have to, or this administration will figure out how to respond to that in a way that is the right choice, I guess.
And again, I get it. The administration's getting a lot of pushback domestically from both sides. There are plenty of pro-Palestine, pro-Palestinian, even really pro-Hamas terrorist, support out there. There's tons of pro-Israel. You've also got the kind of converse, maybe not necessarily for Palestine, but definitely anti-Semitic. And then you've got the anti-Semitic, so there's a lot of, variations in all of this going on here in the United States that the administration's got to deal with. But that's why you're the president. That's why you're in office, is because you have to take you have to decide what our position is and stick to it and understand the consequences and battle through them. What you can't be, which is exactly what this administration is wishy-washy. Right. And it harkens back to the Clintons. You can go back. They had opportunities to kill Osama bin Laden, but they decided, to launch some missiles out in the middle of the desert, and it was ineffective. And, those kinds of things. You had a lot of not very decisive moments in the Obama administration, whether people know it or not. President Obama was very reluctant to actually go into Pakistan to kill bin Laden on the night of that raid. There's a very wishy-washy kind of mentality that comes with, the Democratic Party when it comes to high-level violence. I hate to say it, but that's really what this boils down to. So you can't play the humanitarian card and the politics card and the policy card and the stability. It doesn't work. You've got to figure out what is best for the region, what's best in our national interests, and stick with it. And if you burn a bridge, okay, so be it. But that's what diplomacy is all about. And really what we're doing is, like you said, try to appease everybody. And really we're appeasing no, we're doing nothing except screwing ourselves over because we're being wishy-washy.
Right. And then the cynic in me, comes back to, because, that's what this is administration for me. I won't speak for anybody else, but for me, this administration has filled me with such a sense of cynicism as to their motives for everything that they do. So, my questions to that are, so what's the deal here? Are you being wishy-washy because you don't like violence, and I don't mean to make fun, because nobody likes violence, but sometimes, as we know, violence is the necessary measure in order to make things happen that need to happen, right? So is the wishy-washiness because you're afraid to take that step and have the consequences of that? Or is it because you have interests that will be affected by making the more popular decision? I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but making the decision that, historically based on the past relationships that should be made. I think it's maybe a more fair way to say it, right? So yeah, I mean, that's the cynic in me saying, like, what's your reason? What's the actual reason that you are just, playing the balancing act on this line that you can't not know that it's an untenable position to be in. You have to make a decision.
Yeah, it's the line in the sand. It really is. You have to draw a line somewhere and you've got to stand by it. You've got to have a spine. And again, sometimes violence is what comes out of that. But, war is an extension of diplomacy. That's the way it works. It's the end of it. But that is a tool that's in your toolbox.
Yeah.
It has
and
to
it's
be.
always the last resort, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it's the go-to every time. Like, oh, you're not gonna do what I want you to do? Okay, we're going to go shoot you up. It's a last resort. So when you get to that point, I mean, that decision has to be made. And, I have the simplest solution. And of course, the Biden administration certainly doesn't want this solution. Go and do whatever Trump was doing, because as you mentioned, during his administration, peace was, if not fully brokered, it was definitely on the table and happening. I mean, the guy was actually, I don't know who knows this or remembers this or maybe even believes it. He was being nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Sure was.
For his work.
Yep.
Not just once, but multiple times.
Yep.
How quickly that gets ignored and erased, and the blind, that didn't happen. No, it happened. It's real. He did. And it was because of what he, had done during his time. And like you said, it was like within seconds, it felt like, of Biden being in office and that administration running the show, everything went to shit, like, rapidly. So I don't know. I'm just saying, go do what he did, and things will be okay again.
and listen, we didn't like it as Americans. We don't like it when other countries stick their nose into what we're doing, right? We got I'm pretty sure there was some trials and some other things. We were talking about Russian interference in our elections, right? There were some things that were manufactured, whatever. Essentially, that is what the president is doing when he says we support Israel and their right to defend themselves, but we don't like the way Netanyahu is doing business, and they make it public. And it's not a closed door discussion with Bibi to say, hey man, this is what you're doing, whether you agree with it, whether you and I agree with it or not. If the president doesn't agree with it and he has a closed door with him and he says, you need to tone things down, or, hey, we're not really on board with this and we're going to have to back away with our support. And you do that quietly and you do it behind closed doors. That's diplomacy. You don't do it in the State of the Union, which is kind of where we're going next. But that is not the place that you do this. You don't do it in public without giving Israel the opportunity to respond, or at least, defend their position. So it's poor politics all the way around. Yeah. But